Right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to all of you out there in the rural schools community for joining us today. We're doing a really important topic today. Actually, I was just having a chat a few minutes ago with Jodie, who's our guest presenter today, about the whole topic of inclusive schools, and it's not one that's perhaps the sexiest topic. It's not one that that people come running for. Is oh wow, I really want to talk about inclusive schools. There's more brighter buzzwords, I guess, out there in the education community at the moment, but I don't think there's a more important one. Excuse me. I don't think there's a more important one at the moment, and it certainly, I guess, came to my attention even last night when I had to do a little bit of media on the project on Channel 10 about schools funding, and it ended up very quickly turning to some comments made by Pauline Hanson about students on the autism spectrum and how they needed to, I guess, effectively be gotten out of the way. And I thought, wow, what a timely, as I drove home, I sort of chuckled to myself about, wow, it's almost like the planets were along an inclusive schools webinar that we were going to run the day after all that came to attention. So here we are, ready to run a webinar on that. So I want to introduce you today to our guest presenter, who I am absolutely, completely confident that is going to have no issue with sound or anything like that coming through. So Jodie, have you got me?
Yes, I do.
Oh, very good. So first little hurdle is overcome, that the sound is working from one end of Australia to the other. So Jodie is a colleague of mine from, we'd probably best, Jodie, just to say way back rather than to try and calculate the actual number of years. That's probably fair as both of us. But Jodie and I worked together extensively in the Northern Territory, and I guess for me, where I met Jodie was in the Student Services Division of the Northern Territory. So very much leading, coordinating and supporting schools to become more inclusive, to bring kids into the fold who come with a wide variety of different challenges. We met in that part of the world, Jodie, but then we both moved into direct school leadership ourselves. And we both did the principal thing in the Northern Territory, and I know that a lot of what we worked on together at Student Services became really core business in the way that we did our work as principals as well. So welcome, Jodie. How you going?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you so much. I'm really excited, Adam, to participate in this, and I really just want to do a big shout out to the people that have registered and are taking time out of their very busy days to listen, but also have a bit of a yak about inclusivity. As you know, Adam, it's something very close to my heart, and it's something really important to me. So I hope that what I deliver today will be useful and beneficial to the people that are listening. So I'm excited. Just to give you a heads up, though, just in terms of contextualizing where I am right now, and I had this conversation with Adam earlier. I actually, at the moment, am the general manager of Variety, the children's charity up here in the Territory. And so for the last 4 days, I've actually been out driving around in the bush, collecting a lot of red dust on my car and under my fingernails. And I came home just after midnight last night and turned on my laptop, and like Adam, just saw that the planets aligned, that I was about to talk to all of you today about inclusivity, and saw the Pauline Hanson comment. So hopefully it's going to be a productive conversation that we have, and quite relevant in the space and time that we're in.
Yeah, I reckon too. I just think that I know that for me, even looking online last night at the comments of educators all over Australia, that they really jumped to the defence of this concept of being inclusive. That what we're really looking for is the support and also the strategies of how we can do that really, really well. And I thank you, Jodie, for being here today, because I know that you're someone who not only understands the theory behind that, but you've got the red dirt under your fingernails in terms of actually making it happen. So, that's certainly why we've got you here today. So thank you so much for being a part of that.
No.
Well, just to kick things off, I do just want to remind everybody that's in the house today that you're the ones driving this bus. So, this isn't the Jodie or the Adam show today. We really want you involved. We really want your interactivity there. And there's a couple of ways that you can do it. First of all is that you can use the hand up function. So if you have a look on your control panel, you'll see a little hand that gives you the opportunity there to put your hand up. We're going to keep an eye on that today. And if anybody does have their hand up, we have the capacity to go into the attendee section and just unmute you. So if you've got something to say or something to ask, then you can certainly put your hand up, just like a regular old classroom, and the teacher will acknowledge you, and you'll be able to have your say and ask your question to get some clarity today. So we really want this concept of inclusivity to be contextualised in your school. So, it's not just about the theory today, but it's about what you do with it after today. So make sure you do put your hand up. You can also ask a question. So if you look at the question box that you've got availability to there, you can ask, there'll be two types of questions you can ask. One is a question that is directly to Jodie about the content of what we're talking about. What if I've got a teacher who does this, or, we have a student or a family in this position? You can ask those questions today. We really want you to, feel free to do that. We also, you could have a techo problem. So we have the wonderful Chris online today, our business manager at Real Schools. And so Chris is sitting ready and waiting, and she's already probably exhausted from making sure that Jodie and I are completely organised with the tech side of things. But if you're having trouble hearing or seeing anything, pop a question in there, and Chris is going to be able to take care of you with that to make sure that you can participate fully today. The next thing I just want to do,
Adam, because we're inclusive.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We've got to practice it.
Sorry.
The first thing that I want to know, just before I completely hand over to you, Jodie, and get out of the way, is I just want to ask this question. I'm going to quickly launch a poll if I can here, and it's just to find out where you're coming from in this battle, I guess, to defend this inclusivity concept that we have. We're really interested to know where you come to this webinar from today. So we want to know if you're a principal or a system leader, if you're an AP, if you're in a senior teacher or leading teacher kind of role, if you're here because you want to know more about it to help with your career and you've got some aspiration around leading, or if you're right at the coalface, if you're teaching, if you're an education support staff worker, or you're in some other designated role within the school, really want you to just put that in there so that we can get a really strong sense of what your hopes and aspirations are for today. So I really like to get that up above 80% so that we know what we've got here, and we've jumped straight past it. What responsive people you all are. So look, I'm going to close that poll. I'm going to share those results with you now, and what I hope that you can see on your screen now is that we've got half the people in the room are right in the classroom. So that's really important for us, Jodie. And then we've got a bit of a smattering of people in leadership roles as well. So I guess what we're looking for here is nice practical stuff, but then also stuff that we can spread and cultivate, I reckon, isn't it? So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that gives us a really good idea as we move forward. So I'm just going to hide those results, come back here, and this is where we do the really smooth changeover, Jodie. So this is the bit where I'm going to mute myself and hand over the presentation opportunity to Jodie, and I will come back in and speak to you all at the end.
Thank you, Adam. And again, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. I feel very blessed. So I just want to tell you just a little bit about myself first so that you can understand and appreciate, I guess, where I'm coming from in terms of the comments that I'm making. I have been living and working in the Northern Territory for the last 15 years at a whole range of levels, at a system level in terms of overseeing disability support services and funding, as well as senior teacher level, AP level, and predominantly principal level, both in a primary school setting, which had a a creche or childcare facility attached to it, and then more middle schools. The two middle schools that I worked in, the first middle school was a school that had 43% Indigenous students, and then pretty much the rest was a whole, box and dice of difference and diversity. And the second middle school that I worked in was 20% Indigenous, and then a whole box and dice in terms of diversity. I've also led the establishment of an asylum program. So for those people that come to our shores that are incarcerated, we set up an educational program that provided for those people up to 18 years of age. And then I was also a part of setting up an adult education program outside of that was through the school, but was separate. So in terms of inclusivity, that's been, very much at the heart of my experience in my educational journey. But more recently, I've moved away from education and gone into the non-for-profit sector, and I'm now working at Variety, which is a charity that supports children from 0 to 18 and their families in terms of access and support. And hence why I've been on the road just recently. So I would like to think that what I am about to talk to you about comes with a depth and breadth of experience, real experience, and hopefully in terms of our conversations now, we'll be able to, just talk a bit more about inclusivity. But I just have to do a shout out right now to Chris and Adam, because the slides have suddenly disappeared. So I'm hoping that I can bring them back, and I'm hoping that it's just not a territory thing. So
I'm back in here, Jodie. Sorry, just to make sure that this is going to work. I think, Jodie, what we need to do as the presenter now is to share your screen. And then you should be able to...
I know, but I've got...
Open your PowerPoint and just go from wherever you want to go.
Yeah, I know, but I'm going show screen and...
Have you got that play button there, Jodie? Sorry.
No, that's all right. And I'm so sorry to everyone else.
No, well, I think we're getting there now, Jodie. I can see your screen, and if you open the PowerPoint that you want to demonstrate today and just start.
Okay, I can. Yep. I can't see it.
Yep.
Here we go.
We can see it coming up.
Okay. My sincere apologies to everyone out there. How frustrating.
If you just open that PowerPoint, Jodie. There it is. Straight to slide 4. And
perfect. Thank you.
Play your slideshow from there.
Okay.
Isn't technology great?
Oh, I'm at the opposite end of the universe to you at the moment, so it's good that we can be inclusive enough to connect.
Can you just go to slideshow, Jodie, there? You see slide to actually present?
No.
Not in the control panel, but in PowerPoint. Whoops.
Yeah.
Along the tabs there to slideshow.
Yeah.
From current slide.
Yep. There it is.
No, don't present online. No, cancel that. Go to from current slide. To the second little button down.
Yep, got it. Sorry.
It's the one. Okay. It's the one we're in.
Oh, there you go.
I'm out of your way.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, and again, apologies to everyone. Okay, so what is inclusivity, you know, and what does it mean for us? And historically, if we talk from an academic perspective, historically inclusivity has been generated out of the disability sector and has been articulated in that way. But inclusivity, as we all know, in terms of the social layers of our community, it's much more than that. It's about the me, it's about the school, it's about the community and the diversity and range of variety out there that we have. It's also, in terms of, I guess, it as a pathway to ensure that your school is inclusive, it's a journey of growth that's challenged by lots of expectations. Those expectations, as you know, if I refer back to the me, the school, and the community, it's very much defined about that. The bottom line, though, it's actually about a value set, and it's a value set about how we engage and have a relationship with others. If you ask educators to think about inclusivity, at times there's a disconnect and a challenge that we have, because as we all know, you know, in terms of the national curriculum, national standardised testing, those more generic, broader expectations that are very competitive based, inclusivity is at the opposite end, I guess, in some ways of that. So our challenge as educators and as individuals within our society is how do we deal with that disconnect? How do we deal with that, the expectations of the standardised agenda that we all have to adhere to, but also ensure that every child within our world and our classrooms actually has a good, fair go to become successful in whatever way they need to be successful. And that's about a sense of belonging. That's about having a consistent expectation of high achievement. It's also about connectedness, you know, within our community and ensuring that we can actually make sure that what we're doing is all about those high expectations, that we don't compromise those expectations because we might have a belief, or our colleagues might have a belief that because that child is X or Y, they're not important. Yeah. Sorry, my phone just... The other aspect of it is that, like, in terms of inclusivity, there's also an acknowledgement or a need as educators to appreciate the isolation and the separation or the disconnect for the individuals within our cohort. That requires for us to be very cognizant of our social and emotional intelligence, and so that means that we need to think outside of the box in terms of how we deal with this situation, because it is very complex. From my perspective as a principal, when I first went into my first middle school up here in the Territory, I felt like I had walked into a war zone. There were children that were, you know, turning concrete tables over. There was a lot of violence, you know, in the playground, and that was very cultural based. There were staff that were fearful to go out and do duty, or they just didn't even want to come to work because it was just all too hard. way too hard. So for me, in terms of the inclusivity agenda, it made me realise that what I needed to do was really reflect and think about things at a relationship level, and that's what it was about. Yes, I had to, as a principal, still meet the organisational needs that I needed to make and address, but I really had to think about how can I connect individually with the students in my school? How can I connect individually with the staff in my school? Because without their input and their generosity of spirit, then it didn't matter what I did, we wouldn't achieve anything, because I needed to support them. It was also about connecting with the community and looking outside of the school walls in terms of seeking extra support, because I knew right at that time, when I first walked into that school, that there was no way in hell I could possibly do it on my own. It had to be a collective process, and it had to be a collective vision. I am reflecting now back on the spread of people that are tapping in today, and I do note that 50% of those people are, working right at the coalface, as opposed to someone like me that, at the moment is separated from that. And I do appreciate and understand that how intensively emotional it is each and every day to engage with and deal with inclusivity and diversity within your school, because it's a challenging space to be in. What am I talking about in terms of inclusivity as opposed to diversity? Well, inclusivity is really, and I'm just moving up the next slide. I'll go to diversity first. Diversity is very much about looking at the dimensions or the differentiation of groups. So it's kind of that data-driven agenda, I guess, that we all have to engage with within a school context. It's, acknowledging, okay, I've got so many Indigenous students in my class, I've got so many, special needs students, whatever. That's just about acknowledgement of the groups. That's not what inclusivity is about, or inclusion. Inclusion is about a state of being where you move beyond actually, from a data perspective, acknowledging and taking note of the who. It actually moves into the how and the why and the wherefore of what we do. And that in itself is a huge burden in a negative way, but also a blessing in a positive way, to think about, okay, in terms of the diversity, what do we need to do in our organisation to actually establish some practices and relationships that actually make a difference? And from my perspective, this slide that I've just presented now is what it's about. So diversity is the mix that we have to deal with, but inclusion is about getting the mix to work well. And that's going to look and feel and sound different in every context that we are involved in. That's going to look different in the schoolyard, as opposed to the classroom, as opposed to the supermarket, as opposed to us engaging in just general life. And our challenge is to work out, how we go about that and what that means. Traditionally, our responsibility within the classroom has been very much about dividing children up into spaces and access points. And it's also very much been about a sense of isolation and about non-participation. So for those students that don't fit into the, the generic fold that we think, they've sat outside of that. We've seen evidence of individual behaviour plans, PD that's offered in your school that's just in time or very theme-based, often from the system, not generated at the local level, and that the resources or the significant resources within the school have been dedicated to specialised settings or specialised programs. Planning's, the curriculum planning and the assessment regime has been very generic and has been focusing wholly and solely towards system goals as opposed to individual student or needs-based goals. In contrast to that, an inclusive environment is an environment where learning in the classroom is layered and targeted to students. Now, when I say that, there's a sense of hesitancy in me saying that, both from a teacher perspective, but also from a principal perspective. I think one of the things that we as teachers and or educators is that we feel like we have to solve every single problem in the world and we have to do it individually. Realistically, that's not possible, and we all know that. And that's a part of the dilemma, I think, that a lot of educators grapple with, on a daily basis. I've got a friend in Brisbane who is teaching in a special needs unit, and we'll have our regular weekly catch-up phone calls, over a glass of wine, and deconstruct and debrief over the week. And I would love $1 for every time that she said to me, "Jodie, I tried to get it right, I tried to do it, and as much as I tried to do it, it just didn't come together. And the only way that ultimately it might have come together was because I collaborated." And for me, the inclusivity agenda and thinking about and organising yourself as an individual educator, it is about that collaboration, but acknowledging, yes, you do need to meet the needs of the individual student, but it shouldn't be from a perspective of, oh my God, that's so overwhelming and I can't do everything for everybody. That's not what it's about. It's actually about trying to be respectful, engaging, listening, and have high expectations, not compromise those expectations. So the next point that I've got there is that all students participate in assessment with needed or approved adaptations. It's realising that it's achievable, and it's just about doing the tweaks around the edges that change the process, but gives the child, the individual child or group of children, and it may be that case, a feeling of engagement and success, and not a feeling of, oh my gosh, my teacher, because I'm this or because I'm that, I'm not able. One of the things that I've constantly found through my career is that parents and students are really quick and very insightful in picking up my child, this teacher doesn't believe my child can succeed, or this teacher doesn't believe that our family is successful. if you take nothing else away from today, the thing that I would say to you is, it's all about that relationship. It's all about that engagement. It's all about those high expectations. It's about being focused on success and focused on making sure that in your interactions with a child and with the family and within the school context or your colleagues, that it's a positive process. It's not a deficit model. It's far from that. In terms of school-wide approach to behaviour, it's not about because that person has got, that disorder or this issue, we have to be, we've got a code for that and a code for this. It's actually about having a broad culture of care and a broad culture of expectation. It's about being insightful about what the overall capacity is of you as an individual, but also of your staff. So having those conversations and unpacking the experience. Some of my best insight and my best conversations have actually been with the teacher assistant in the classroom, and I've sat down with them, had a cuppa and said, what do you see? What do you see are the positives and the negatives, the gaps and the uncertainties within this environment, and how do you think, from a solution perspective, how do you think that we can move forward and deal with this? And that's really important. It's about having those broad conversations with everyone who's in the community to actually engage with that reflective process. And that the richness of that then allows the value of the true moral and ethical value of inclusivity to move forward and be engaging, because you're actually getting a holistic perspective on what the reality is. It's also making sure that, and I know as a principal I've been guilty of this at times as well, where you go, oh, okay, well, we've got, 12 iPads, but those iPads are just for the maths group when they do their, 2-week presentation on, XYZ, whatever. It's actually about being flexible, about all of the resources available. And for me, particularly in terms of the position that I'm currently in from a non-for-profit sector, so I'm outside of the education parameter, but very much wanting, from the charity perspective, engage in education and support in education. It's about making that connectivity and being creative innovators and thinkers with regards to tapping out those resources and engaging with those resources. One of the things that I constantly said myself as a principal, but I also constantly said as a teacher, I'm lacking in resources. I need this, I need that. I don't have it. We haven't got the money for it. What can I do about it? It's actually looking beyond the horizon and thinking, okay, what's actually out there beyond the horizon that me as an individual or collectively as a school that we can tap into that will actually support our inclusive agenda in terms of making a massive difference in the individual lives of children every single day, which then leads into that next point, which is, planning, thinking. It's not just about in the classroom, but it's about the whole environment. How do we address the real needs of our student cohort? What do they need? Because they're going to come to us with a whole range of needs. We can't meet all of those needs, but we can establish a school where there's a moral imperative for us to be all on the same page about expectation in terms of that need. So that's about the school climate. An inclusive school climate is a climate that individually and collectively, irrespective of where the child's needs are coming from, whether that be from a cultural perspective, a religious perspective, a disability perspective, an IT perspective, or an emotional perspective. It's about us having a collective agreement. This is what we believe are the rights of the children within our environment, and we all are putting our hand up and acknowledging a collective responsibility around that. It's not the responsibility of the tutor that's in the classroom looking after the child with Asperger's. It's not the special ed teacher who's delivering a targeted program to the child that needs some literacy assistance. It's not about the assistant principal who's dealing with the behavioural problem. It's not about the school principal that's dealing with the parent that's gone off because their child's just been suspended. It's actually about us collectively all not associating those roles with particular responsibilities. It's us collectively acknowledging that we all have that responsibility and that we all contribute to that. So curriculum, learning and assessment, that's a tricky one. We've got a national agenda, we've got a standardised testing agenda, and we have to tick those boxes. There's no doubt about that. That's a given. What we need to do, though, as educators, is to then navigate around those parameters and work out, okay, how can we make adaptation and support using all of our resources that are physical resources, human resources, and monetary resources to best ensure that each child within our community is actually being given an opportunity to experience success, to experience a sense of belonging within a culture of care. One of the ways that we can do that is to be really very clear and thoughtful in terms of our staff development and how we identify what the capacity is of each and individual staff member and how they can contribute to that agenda. One of the things that I felt blessed by when I was at one of the middle schools that I taught in was that we were fortunate enough to have an external program, which was Clontarf. And so one of the things that I did when it was appropriate was really tap into their networks, their expertise and their relationships in order to ensure that that inclusive culture and agenda within our school actually lived and breathed. And sometimes that meant that me as a principal, or even, some of my staff as senior teachers or teachers, really connected with that opportunity, so that sometimes those people actually led the way forward. They were the ones that actually provided the advice and the input and the support, and we stepped back. So it's very much about, looking at what's the capacity right across your school, irrespective of level and how much you earn a year. It's about who's the person that's going to best support this child at this point in time, and where can I access that, and how can I collectively draw that together to make a difference for this child or this family. Again, support services, as I said, because of my current role in Variety, that's been highlighted to me so significantly. My first day on the job, I met this woman who was the mother of a child with Down syndrome. Variety, over quite a long period of time, had provided financial and emotional support to the family. For her to pay back to the community and to also pay back to Variety, what she did was she set up a free swimming program for students for children with disabilities, to not only help them emotionally, but also to pick up the gap where, you know, my child's autistic, or my child's got Down syndrome. I've gone to the local swimming club, and the local swimming club thinks it's beyond their capacity to deal with. So I want my child to learn how to swim, but I need to find a service in which to do that. That was her experience. She then turned around and created that experience, not only for her child, but has created it for many other children. So she was telling me a story of when her daughter, so she'd had this program in place and still does, so it's been in operation for about 15 years. But when her daughter, which was about 5 years ago, left the education system here in the Territory, she phoned the Chief Executive of the Department of Education and said, I would like to put on a morning tea for the support staff at Student Services, and also the teachers that have educated my daughter. And so the Chief Executive was like, oh, okay, well, we haven't come across that before. We haven't had to deal with that before. Yeah, we can make that happen, but, you know, it's not really necessary. And she said, well, it is actually necessary. It's necessary for me and my child. So she had the morning tea, and she put on, you know, beautiful spread of scones and cups of tea and whatever. And at the end of it, she said, I want to thank you all for the difference that you made in my child's life. But I also want to say to you that you made it bloody hard, and it didn't need to be as hard as what it was. And I was trying to work with you, not against you, but you didn't actually take the time to have the conversation with me about how I could better work with you and what things I could actually more effectively do to make a difference for my child. And when she said that to me, it made me think about how in the past I've interacted with children and families, and how, what was the perspective I was coming from? I was coming from the perspective of, you know, whether it be from when I was a classroom teacher or a senior teacher or an assistant principal or a principal, or now, you know, in my current role. How was I being inclusive, and what was my mindset? Was I thinking about ticking the boxes and what I had to do just to get through the day? Or did I actually make the time and space to sit down and have a real conversation with the child and the family about how, in my role, whatever role that be, could actually make a difference in the access of that child's education? And that was a big reflective point for me, because I think that we all can get very much caught up in ticking the boxes and thinking about what we have to do just to get through the day, and forget that for some of our young people and for some of our families, they're just trying to get through the day as well. and maybe just with a little bit of a tweak or a change in how we do our business might actually make their day a little bit easier, which then in turn makes our personal day a little bit easier because we've just jumped a hurdle, or we've just removed a blockage, or we've just been a little bit more thoughtful, or we've just been a little bit more respectful, which goes into the parental involvement and community involvement. That is so critical. The broader you seek out resources, the more rich and engaged your students can be. If your individual students see a recognition within their school environment of the contribution that they and their respective communities can make, that makes a very rich tapestry of greatness, and very much promotes that sense of inclusivity and connectivity. I've already talked about resources earlier. From my perspective, both at a classroom level, but also at a principal level and all the way in between, tapping into resources and being creative entrepreneurs and innovators around that is so important. And not taking no for an answer. You know, okay, we don't have, you know, the iPad for the autistic child in our classroom. Well, okay, let's look at our community. Let's look at our parent body. How can we actually access that? It's about thinking beyond the classroom walls, but thinking about, well, what partnerships can we generate to actually increase the resources in our schools? And that's not always about dollars or physical things. That, you know, those resources can be a whole range of things. That whole sense of, the next point that I've got there is school self-evaluation. From my perspective, that's a critical part of this whole journey in terms of inclusivity. Inclusivity is a very deep and broad agenda. We're not going to be able, as I said earlier, to be everything to everybody. But what we need to do is look at what we're doing well right now and how we can do better. Look at how that means for our staff in terms of their capacity, and then channeling our professional learning and our collaborative conversations back to where the gap is. And that then all links up into a really comprehensive education plan where we go, well, this is what the reality is about our school community. This is where we want to be. This is what our objective is, or our vision is. And these are all of the pieces of the puzzle that we need to fill. How are we going to do that? Who's best to do that? And how are we going to evaluate that, track it, and be responsible for it so that we can know that we're moving from one point to another. One of the things that I think as educators that we don't do well is that we don't celebrate those short-term wins and we don't acknowledge the impact and the input. I'm sure that, for example, there would be a number of classroom support teachers that are listening to what I'm saying that would go home at night and say to their partner, or in my case, their bunny rabbit or their chicken, you know, oh my God, I worked my ass off today. Like, I put everything into it. I was trying to do the right thing with this child, and I just feel like it's not acknowledged and it's not appreciated, and people just don't understand. I'm frustrated, and, you know, I don't feel valued, or I don't feel like the needs of this child are being met, and I'm trying to have that conversation with people and they're just not listening. For me, those short-term wins but that collaborative, reflective conversation is so very critical at every level of the school environment. It's about being open to the negative, but being solution-driven in a response. And that solution-driven conversation is not and should never be from a principal or leadership perspective. It should be from a distributed leadership perspective. It should be about each member of the community having the right to have a voice about their perspective and their input into how we can do better. And then providing opportunities to celebrate that at all levels of the community as well. Anchoring the change. Making that change in the classroom, in the school environment, and interactions with the community needs to be transparent. It needs to be collectively discussed. It needs to, you know, as I said in the previous slide, celebrated. But those benchmarks and those milestones as we go through becoming an inclusive environment, we need to acknowledge that and appreciate that, because a part of the inclusivity agenda is very much about acknowledgement, appreciation, and understanding. I was listening to a TED talk just recently from an educator, an inclusive educator from Canada. And one of the things that she repeatedly said was that the voice, the inclusivity voice is not a privileged voice, it is a collective voice. And I kind of struggled with that at first, because I thought, okay, what's a collective voice? Is that everyone saying the same thing at the same time? And then as I listened to her, I realised that where she was coming from was that that collective voice wasn't everyone saying the same thing. It was opportunities for the community's unique experiences or insights or understanding to be brought back in to a way forward. So if I go back to what I said earlier about my experience when I was at a middle school in Darwin, there was a group of people that came to me and said, this is what we need. And that was with regards to educating asylum seekers. And I said, yeah, we can do that. Like, that's fine. I then went back to the department and said, okay, this is what I want to do. And it was like, no, you can't do that. No, not possible. Can't happen. And I was like, well, no, we've got, you know, this agency willing to do this. We've got this agency willing to do that. They'll input here, they'll input there, whatever. We can actually make this work. So for me, that took me back to that point, because it was like, okay, there's a collective voice there. So we're all going in the same way, in the same direction. We can all input in various ways to do it. And then ultimately the whole element of inclusivity and the capacity for those children to be educated, which they should be, can actually happen. So it's about the structure of your school and how you operate within your school. It's about the climate from a moral and ethical perspective. It's about how you individually and collectively engage with each other. It's about adhering to a collective ethos of inclusivity. If you're going to do it, you do it well, or you don't bother to do it at all. But most importantly, it's about relationships. One of the things that I miss about being a principal and miss about being in education is the relationships that I had each and every day with individual students within my school, and also their parents. I miss walking down the corridor and one of my students coming up to me and saying, "Oh, Miss, how was your weekend?" Or, "Oh, Miss, I really like your top." Or more often, and Adam will have a bit of a chuckle at this, I'm sure, I'm a bit of a shoe girl. And so more often it was the boys in the middle school that would go, "Oh, Miss, I really like those shoes. Didn't really like the shoes you wore last week or yesterday," or whatever. So that whole sense of relationship, I really miss. I also miss the fact that many times you would have parents come in and go, "You know what, I'm doing it really, really tough. But, you know, teacher A, my child's maths teacher actually really helped my son or daughter out today, and I just want to thank you for that, because it just made our life a bit easier when he came home to try and do this, that, or whatever." Or a parent comes in and says, "You know what, the assistant teacher that was in my daughter's English class today really made her feel connected and valued, and that's made the world of difference."
So, Jodie, I'll probably jump in there if that's okay. I figured that the shoe comment was my opportunity to get you going. I'm just mindful of time here, unfortunately, and as much as I'm sitting here stuck in this whole concept of inclusivity now, I know that I've got people who'll have to make their way away now after an hour or so. So I just wanted to thank you, Jodie, for so much for all of that information today. We do have a question there. While I finish up the webinar, I might just see if I can get you to click forward, Jodie, on your slides there, just to the end of our webinar here, just to remind people about the one we've got coming up next. I think your point there is well made about a smile and being really important. We had a question from Benjamin, which was, how would you work towards building a respectful and inclusive environment when the cultural background, so this is a question about cultural diversity, when the cultural background of the school includes cultures that don't value gender equality as a priority. So where you get some of those traditional cultures or cultures from other countries where you're trying to get that inclusive process around gender, but culture is getting in the way. What are your thoughts on that? So I'll get to ponder that for just a moment if I can, just while I wrap things up here, and just remind people that our next webinar is on the 20th of July, and it's very much about what you were talking there, Jodie, with that concept of cultivating teacher-student relationships, and this whole thing, even this inclusive approach, how it works so much better when you're leveraging a stronger, a thicker, a more meaningful relationship. So what we're going to do next month is work on those high-quality, high-expectation relationships, and I've just must be about 7 or 8 times I heard you mention that imperative around high expectations there as a lever for better learning. So what are those perfect teacher-student relationships is what we're going to look at next week. And just, Jodie, if you click to the last slide, which is just the reminder about how they can get in touch with us to find out more. But just, I guess, Jodie, in the last sort of minute that we've got here,
Sorry.
have you got advice I know really quickly, but without notice, but have you got any advice for Benjamin around that gender equality agenda?
Look, I from my perspective, I believe that it's about having just general expectations within the school. And so, you know, if you've got families or individuals within the school that don't value, appreciate, or are being respectful about that, it's actually not about the issue individually. It's actually about how we behave generally. And so
it's got to be about, you know, you've got your own cultural diversity,
yeah,
which
you've got your own perspective on that, but in this community, we are respectful of people. We don't have to like them, we don't have to appreciate them, but our behaviour has to be respectful towards them. And I think that that's just the general basis of where we're coming from. And yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, but it's also about education as well, you know.
Yeah, help people to understand that expectation.
Yeah, and I know, and I am mindful of time, Adam, so I will be very quick. I know one of the things, particularly when I set up the asylum program at the middle school that I was in Darwin, one of the things that our adult program, which was just about males, not about females, one of the issues that we had was when we actually welcomed them to the school, these males that we set this program up for were being welcomed by a female principal. And so, you know, the whole concept of that was just overwhelming and, you know, unbelievable. But by the time I had the opportunity to chip away at the relationship with them and engage with them as a community, both in their setting when they were, you know, in their space, but also within the school environment, over time that actually made a difference. And so whilst they might not have respected me fully as a female and as a principal, because of the relationship that I cultivated with them, there was a level of acceptance, if that makes sense.
It's a bit of understanding, isn't it, what the first step might look like? And not expecting to make a big leap quickly, but to say, all right, what would it look like for us to get the first 5 or 10% of that journey done? Yeah, that makes sense.
And from my perspective, that's about the cultivation of communication and relationships. And, you know, there's what do they say? You know, you can solve the world's problems by breaking bread together.
Yeah.
You know, like it's true. If you actually sit down and break bread and start talking with people about things, it's quite interesting. You're not going to change their perspective overnight. You may never change their perspective, but what you might change is their day-to-day capacity to at least be nice and engaging.
All right. Well, I'm going to try and very nicely end the webinar there. We are over time. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming along. And thank you so much, Jodie, for all of your wisdom in this space. We really appreciate it. We know you've added a lot for everybody who's here today, for everybody who watched the recording, and for our members who access all of these webinars in an ongoing way. So thank you very much, Jodie. And thank you, everyone else, for being here. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.